Investigation underway on what caused the airport accident in Japan. The deputy chief of Hamas killed while he's in Lebanon. The national security trial of Jimmy Lai continues. Hello and welcome to TVB News. Japanese police are investigating whether a runway collision between an airliner and a smaller plane at a Tokyo airport on Tuesday may involve a miscommunication. All 379 people miraculously escaped a burning Japan Airlines Flight 516. The Airbus A350 caught fire after colliding with a Bombardier Dash 8 Coast Guard plane shortly after landing at Haneda Airport in Tokyo. 5 of the 6 Coast Guard crew were killed. The Japanese Prime Minister offered his condolences to the victims while praising the professionalism of the JAL crew. Nazvi Karim has more.
The shell of an Airbus A350 Japan Airlines plane lies blackened and collapsed at Haneda Airport in Tokyo. But it doesn't tell the full story. The fact that all 379 crew and passengers were able to evacuate safely is a miracle in itself. Experts say the carbon composite skin used by Airbus since the 1980s protected the fuselage from the fire long enough for passengers to escape. This is a scene inside the cabin as passengers realized something was wrong. Aviation experts say the crew must have acted professionally to ensure a quick and smooth escape, with passengers helping the evacuation by leaving their hand luggage inside the overhead bins. They quickly slid down the emergency slides. It took around 20 minutes after the collision for all passengers and crew to reach safety. Officials say 4 people were taken to a medical facility while 14 others were injured. This 59-year-old passenger who works in the telecom sector said he felt the plane tilt to one side on the runway and then felt a big bump. He said the flight attendants told him to stay calm and instructed passengers to leave the plane. It took around 6 hours to extinguish the blaze. The Japanese Coast Guard plane, a Bombardier Dash 8 turboprop, flight MA722, was on its way to Niigata with aid for earthquake victims. 5 crew members were killed and the pilot is in serious condition. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida congratulated the crew on its professionalism. He also offered his condolences to the families of the crew of MA722 who perished, saying they had carried out their jobs with a strong sense of duty and responsibility for the disaster-stricken areas and victims. Police are investigating the incident, particularly why MA722 was on the runway as 516 was landing. They are looking to whether there was miscommunication involving air traffic control. The smaller plane was already on the runway as A350 was landing. The A350 hit MA722 and both aircraft burst into flames. Runway accidents are far less common now given the advanced tracking technology available. JAL Managing Executive Officer Noriyuki Aoki told a press conference that officials were checking whether permission to land had been given by air traffic controllers. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
Flights traveling between Hong Kong and Tokyo's Haneda Airport remain mostly unaffected after yesterday's collision, with only Cathay Pacific's flight CX543 being cancelled. However, a Hong Kong Express flight set to return to the city this morning was delayed by about 4 hours. Timothy Lee tells us more.
More residents have made their way back to the city from Tokyo's Haneda Airport this morning. A Hong Kong Express flight originally set to land in the SAR at 5:55 a.m. only returned at around 10 a.m. Some passengers noted many people remained stuck at the affected Tokyo airport. This woman said although many people were still waiting at Haneda, the situation there was largely calm and stable. This man said the Haneda airport staff tried their best to assist them and were very polite. Meanwhile, one Cathay Pacific and a Japan Airlines flight heading towards Haneda Airport had to return to the city mid-flight. Arrangements were made for the passengers of the latter to stay at an airport hotel before continuing their journey. This passenger said she was pleased with the airline's arrangement, but added she did not receive additional compensation. The airport authority urged tourists to check on their flights before heading to the airport. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
One of the prerequisites for the design and manufacture of a new plane is the ability for it to facilitate the escape of all passengers within 90 seconds. Experts in the aviation industry said passengers must comply with instructions of crew members to minimize injuries or deaths. Under the current requirements by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, any carrier with more than 44 seats must conduct tests proving they can evacuate all passengers within 90 seconds prior to production. The test also mandates the placement of obstacles in the cabin, including newspapers, pillows, or clothes to simulate real-life scenarios. Experts in the aviation sector said the test has become an international standard, adding flight crew members are required to undergo evacuation training every year. In Japan, rescue workers using sniffer dogs are in a race against time to find survivors of Monday's earthquake under rubble, as aftershocks continue to hit the Ishikawa prefecture area. Officials say 64 people died and dozens are believed to be trapped under collapsed buildings. Ishikawa prefecture and nearby areas were rattled by a major 4.9 magnitude aftershock in the early hours of Wednesday, among the dozens of aftershocks following a magnitude 7.6 quake on Monday. The first 72 hours are especially critical, experts say, because the prospects for survival greatly diminish after 3 days. Up to 2,000 self-defense force personnel have been mobilized as relief workers delivered essential supplies. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida offered his prayers to the souls of the deceased. He said rescuers face a race against time because more than 40 hours have passed since the first tremor hit. Premier Li Qiang said China is ready to provide necessary support for Japan's earthquake relief efforts. In a message to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, Li expressed his deep condolences to victims, their families, and the injured. No Chinese casualties have been reported from the earthquake, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said at a press briefing. He said the ministry will monitor the earthquake situation and provide assistance to Japanese citizens in Japan. Asked about the collision involving a Japan Airlines jet and Coast Guard aircraft at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, he said Japan had not made any request for assistance. He said 14 Hong Kong tourists were on the plane, and the Chinese embassy in Japan has been in touch with them. Hamas deputy leader Saleh al-Aruri was killed in a drone strike in Lebanon's capital, Beirut, on Tuesday. Lebanese and Palestinian security sources said Israel was responsible. The assassination raised the risk of the war in Gaza spreading into other countries. Aruri, 57, was the first senior Hamas political leader to be assassinated since Israel launched its offensive on October 7th, following Hamas's attack on Israel. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah group, has warned Israel against carrying out any killings on Lebanese soil, vowing a severe reaction. NBC News with a story.
Tonight, the fiery aftermath of an apparent assassination. A senior Hamas leader killed in what Hamas says was an Israeli drone strike on a Hamas office in Beirut. Saleh al-Aruri was a deputy head of Hamas on a U.S. wanted list, accused of involvement in multiple terror attacks. Hamas saying 7 people were killed in the strike, including 2 commanders. Israel won't say whether it was responsible, but only one country is at war with Hamas.
Israel is at war. Whoever did this has a gripe with Hamas.
Israel's military has vowed to hunt down Hamas leaders worldwide, saying they're living on borrowed time following the October 7th Hamas terror attacks that killed 1,200 people. Tonight, as protests erupt in the West Bank, Israel is bracing for potentially massive retaliation, not just from Hamas, but from Hezbollah, another Iranian-backed group allied with Hamas that's also targeted Israel. The new Israeli foreign minister today declaring we're in the midst of World War III against Iran and radical Islam. The assassination raising the stakes for Israel's cabinet, which postponed a meeting to discuss Israel's new plan for Gaza after the war. An Israeli official telling NBC News the plan involves local Gazan clans or tribes handling civilian governance, like doling out aid, while Israel controls security indefinitely. This as Israel signals the war is entering a new phase, with thousands of Israeli troops on their way out of Gaza, even as Prime Minister Netanyahu says the war will last many more months.
Back locally, the prosecutor in the trial of former media tycoon Jimmy Lai today presented multiple news clippings from Apple Daily as evidence of Lai's seditious intent. This is the fifth day of the landmark trial of Lai, the founder of Apple Daily. Lai is charged with 3 national security offenses to which he pleaded not guilty on Tuesday. Mimo Singhai reports.
There was heavy police presence, including armed officers and police dogs outside the West Kowloon Law Court today. As the national security case of Jimmy Lai continued, prosecutor Anthony Chow made his opening statement this morning. Chow presented numerous news clippings from Apple Daily published during the 2019 protests period. He said those articles were published with a seditious intention, urging the public to participate in protests and asking foreign countries to impose sanctions against China and the SAR. In April 26, 2019, Lai texted former Next Digital CEO Zhang Kim-hong about an interview with Lam Wing-gay from Causeway Bay Books. The interview was published on the front page of Apple Daily the next day, asking people to protest. Lai also told Zhang that Democratic politicians wanted the newspaper to interview Chris Patten, a former governor of Hong Kong, as a way to appeal for Hong Kong residents to take to the streets. On May 21, 2019, Lai attended a talk at the Foreign Correspondents' Club in Central. In his speech, the ex-media tycoon said the extradition bill was harmful and described the then chief executive Carrie Lam as very evil. The prosecution also said Lai had published articles on other media platforms, such as this commentary piece on the Wall Street Journal. The article was titled "There's Hope for Freedom, Even in China," which talked about gaining freedom. The prosecution argued the purpose of the English edition of Apple Daily, introduced before the implementation of national security law, was to receive financial support and political protection from the United States. Lai and his assistant Mark Simon hoped U.S. politicians, including the former Vice President and Secretary for State, would subscribe to the English news. News 9, TVB News.
The Commissioner's Office of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Hong Kong said today the trial of Jimmy Lai is legal and reasonable. In a statement, the office criticized some Western politicians for interfering with Hong Kong's affairs and China's internal affairs. It also described Jimmy Lai as the mastermind of the 2019 protests in Hong Kong and an agent of the anti-China forces who colluded with foreign countries to endanger national security. Still ahead, pay rises suggested for domestic helpers near the Lunar New Year. First Black president of Harvard University resigns after just 6 months. China recorded both extremely hot and very cold temperatures in 2023. Welcome back. With Chinese New Year just around a month away, the Employees Retraining Board will roll out domestic services again and suggested raising the hourly pay for domestic helpers by up to $10. Some helpers said more employers are now asking for assistance with categorizing and handling their rubbish given the upcoming waste charging scheme. The ERB suggested raising the hourly pay to between $135 and $145 before the end of the month. From the 1st to the 9th of February, the ERB suggested raising the pay to between $155 and $165, with further adjustments made according to work locations and hours. In an effort to prevent long queues of mainland tourists waiting for public transport in the future, the government suggested extending cross-border facility services to 24 hours, as well as extending the operating time for trains at the border. This after many tourists had to wait throughout the night at MTR and other public transport stations for a trip back north. Authorities noted they will hold high-level meetings to coordinate traffic prior to large-scale events in the city. Secretary for Transport and Logistics Lam Sai-hung said the government will begin discussing with mainland authorities as soon as possible on increasing train availability to improve the experience of tourists. Overseas, South Korean police today raided the residence and office of the suspect in the stabbing of opposition leader Lee Jae-myung. Officials said Lee's 2-hour surgery was successful. He was conscious and not in critical condition. The incident occurred on Tuesday in the southeastern city of Busan. Police said they sent officers to search the suspect's residence and office in the central city of Asan today. Police said they plan to ask for a formal arrest warrant for the suspect, who was detained immediately after the attack over alleged attempted murder. Officers said the suspect told investigators he attempted to kill Lee and that he plotted alone, but his motive is unknown. After receiving emergency treatment in Busan, Lee was transported by helicopter to the Seoul National University Hospital for surgery. Harvard University's first Black president, Claudine Gay, has resigned after just 6 months on the job. Gay stepped down amid plagiarism accusations and criticism over her views about anti-Semitism in a testimony at a congressional hearing. Her exit sparked conflicting reactions from supporters and critics. More from NBC News.
Tonight, embattled Harvard President Claudine Gay stepping down, abruptly ending her turbulent 6-month tenure as the institution's first Black president, the shortest term of anyone in that position. In a letter to the Harvard community, Gay writing, "It has become clear that it is in the best interest of Harvard for me to resign, and that it has been distressing to have doubt cast on my commitments to confronting hate and to upholding scholarly rigor, two bedrock values that are fundamental to who I am, and frightening to be subjected to personal attacks and threats fueled by racial animus."
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying.
Calls for Gay's resignation followed backlash to this response at last month's congressional hearing, when Republican Elise Stefanik pressed her about anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes.
Pressure grew in the following weeks, with Gay facing multiple allegations of plagiarism in her academic work. Harvard initially standing by Gay, but today the board accepting her resignation, saying she had acknowledged missteps, but also faced deeply personal and sustained attacks. Tonight, Stefanik claiming credit, saying this is just the beginning of what will be the greatest scandal of any college or university in history. Gay's resignation leaving the campus divided.
I'm glad that, it seems like we're moving in a direction where Harvard might begin to repair its public image.
I was flabbergasted. I was more than surprised. I was shocked. I don't think she was really given a chance from the start.
China broke the record for both highest and lowest temperatures last year. The national average temperature in 2023 was 10.7 degrees Celsius. That's around 0.8 degrees higher than the previous year. It's also the highest average temperature since 1961. Areas across the country, such as Beijing, Guangxi, and Xinjiang, also broke the more than 6-decade-old record. Meanwhile, temperatures in China's northernmost city of Mohe in Heilongjiang province and Turpan City in Xinjiang province both broke records, with the former reporting minus 53 degrees in January, and the latter reporting 52.2 degrees in July. The highest and lowest temperatures are more than 100 degrees apart. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.